Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into MCDP 10, the Marine Corps Doctrine on Operations. And we know you're a Marine listening, so this is your bread and butter. But today, we want to give you a rock-solid foundation in MCDP 10 to really get those core concepts that you need for success on the battlefield.
Absolutely. We're going to break down those key elements, how the Marines think about those large-scale operations and campaigns, the different types of warfare that you might face out there, even some of the tactical building blocks that make up those operations. Think of this as your intel brief.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture. Major operations and campaigns. MCDP 10 makes this distinction between the two. You might think they're the same thing, but there's a really key difference.
Yeah, you got it. A major operation is like a focused strike. So think of it as a series of tactical actions, battles, engagements, all aimed at a specific objective. A campaign, on the other hand, that's the big game, a series of those major operations, all linked together to achieve those overarching strategic goals.
So if a major operation is winning a battle, a campaign is winning the war.
Exactly. That's where campaign planning comes in. This is where the rubber meets the road, where national strategy gets translated into action on the ground.
Taking that strategic vision and turning it into a concrete plan of attack.
Precisely. And it's not just about military muscle. You need to think about all the elements of national power, diplomacy, economics, even information warfare, all working together with those military operations.
It's like a symphony then. You need all the instruments to create a masterpiece.
That's a great analogy. Now, NCDP 10 dives into two main military strategies, annihilation and erosion. Annihilation is pretty straightforward. It's that knockout punch, the complete defeat of the enemy.
Total victory, no compromises. What about erosion?
Erosion's more about playing the long game, grinding down the enemy's will to fight, wearing them down until they're forced to give up. Even if their forces aren't completely wiped out, break their spirit.
I'm seeing how these strategies could play out differently. But how does it connect to the types of warfare in MCDP 10?
MCDP 10 breaks down warfare into two basic forms, traditional and irregular. Traditional warfare is what we typically picture. Two nation-states or coalitions fighting each other on the battlefield.
Like those massive clashes in World War II, tanks, trenches.
Exactly. But then you have irregular warfare. This is where things get messy. It can involve non-state actors, insurgencies, guerrilla tactics, fighting for influence over the population. It's a whole different battlefield.
So it's less about conquering territory and more about winning over the people.
You got it. But real-world conflicts rarely fit neatly into one or the other. It's more of a spectrum. You can have elements of both playing out at the same time. MCDP 10 uses some really good historical examples.
Oh, I do love a good history lesson.
Well, take World War II, for example. Yeah, it was largely a traditional war, but you had those irregular elements like the French resistance fighting a guerrilla war against the Nazis. And then you have the Vietnam War. Primarily an irregular conflict, it still involved those large-scale battles between conventional forces.
So things can get complex quickly.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so crucial to understand both the enemy's strategy and the form of warfare they're employing. Knowing this allows you to plan effective campaigns and make smart decisions. MCDP 10 uses a fascinating example from the American Revolution.
I'm all ears.
Okay, so the British back then were stuck in a traditional warfare mindset. They were marching in formation, wearing bright red uniforms. Meanwhile, the Americans were blending in with the terrain, using guerrilla tactics. They were relying on the support of the local population. The British couldn't adapt, and they paid the price.
Underestimating your opponent.
And it really highlights the importance of clear communication. From the top all the way down to the Marines on the ground, everyone needs to understand why they're fighting, what the goals are, how their actions contribute to the bigger picture.
Because if you're just following orders without understanding the why, things can go bad.
You nailed it. And here's another critical point. Those tactical wins and losses, even the seemingly small ones, can ripple outwards, impacting the campaign and even those big picture strategic goals. What happens on the ground can really shift the landscape.
So every action you take, every decision you make as a Marine can make a difference.
That's exactly right. And it reinforces the need to be constantly learning, adapting, and thinking critically about the battlefield. Because in war, nothing stays static.
So we talked about campaigns and different types of warfare, but let's get into the weeds and talk about the different types of operations that make up a campaign. MCDP 10 highlights that these operations can happen all at once. The battlefield is constantly in motion.
Yeah, it's like a chessboard. Pieces are always moving, and you need to be able to adapt on the fly.
Okay, so let's break some of this down. First up, we have counterinsurgency. This is about taking down an insurgency. MCDP 10 emphasizes that it takes more than just force.
You got it. Counterinsurgency is a balancing act. You need a mix of military and non-military efforts. It's not just fighting the enemy, it's winning over the population, providing security, rebuilding infrastructure, showing that you're there to help.
Building trust and showing the people that you're on their side.
Right. Think of it like this. You're trying to drain the swamp, not just kill the mosquitoes. You need to get at those root causes of the insurgency if you want to really achieve peace.
Makes sense. Now, what about defensive operations?
Well, defensive operations are all about holding the line, protecting your territory, protecting your forces. There are different ways to do this. You could have a static defense where you dig in, fortify a position, or you could have a mobile defense, using maneuver to disrupt the enemy's attack.
And then there's that strategic retreat when you pull back to preserve your forces, regroup.
Right. You got to remember that a well-executed retreat can be just as effective as a successful attack. Sometimes knowing when to pull back is the smartest thing you can do.
Okay, so a good defense can be critical. Let's flip the script and talk about offensive operations.
Offensive operations are about seizing the initiative, taking the fight to the enemy. MCDP 10 has all different types of offensive maneuvers. Movement to contact, seeking out the enemy, then the attack itself, closing with and destroying the enemy. Then you move into exploitation, pushing deeper to capitalize on your success. And finally, pursuit, chasing them down to prevent regrouping.
So there's like a whole art to these offensive maneuvers.
There is. Deciding when and how to attack and how to keep the momentum going after you've got the upper hand.
Okay, so MCDP 10 also mentions some other types of operations. Can we go through those quickly?
Sure, like passages of lines, that's one unit moving through the position of another.
Wow.
Link-ups where units join forces. You've got release in place where a unit takes over for another. Obstacle crossings, breakouts from encirclement.
Marines need to be ready for anything.
Exactly. MCDP 10 really hits on adaptability. You never know what you'll face, so you need to think on your feet and adjust.
We've covered offense, defense, and those other maneuvers, but what about gathering intelligence and security?
That's where reconnaissance and security operations come in. Reconnaissance is about getting rid of the fog of war, gathering info on the enemy, their strength, disposition, their intentions. The more you know, the better you can plan and avoid surprises.
So knowledge is power on the battlefield, too.
It really is. And security operations, both offensive and defensive, are about protecting your own forces. Prevent the enemy from surprising you. Control key terrain to deny the enemy freedom of movement.
Staying vigilant, being proactive, and controlling the battlefield.
That's it. MCDP 10 also recognizes that winning isn't just about defeating the enemy. Sometimes you need to create a stable and safe environment after the fighting stops.
Right. Not just breaking things, but building them back up.
Exactly. That's where stability operations come in. Things like humanitarian aid, rebuilding infrastructure, supporting local governance, restoring law and order.
Helping to create the conditions for long-term peace.
Precisely. And often this involves working with other organizations, government agencies, NGOs, international partners. It's a team effort.
Got it. Now let's not forget about the folks that make all these operations possible. The ones who keep the supplies moving.
Sustainment operations. Right.
Oh.
They are unsung heroes. They ensure Marines have food, water, ammo, fuel, medical supplies, everything.
And MCDP 10 points out that the Marine Corps is all about self-sufficiency, being able to operate independently.
Exactly. Marines pride themselves on their ability to be self-sufficient in tough environments. But even the toughest Marine can't fight on an empty stomach or a broken rifle. Sustainment's absolutely vital.
We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dives into MCDP 10. We've covered a lot from campaigns down to those individual operations. But as we said, we've got a big concept to finish with, really ties everything together.
You know, MCDP 10 really emphasizes the importance of adaptability. The battlefield's always changing, the enemy's always trying to outsmart you, and Marines need to be able to think on their feet.
It's not just about remembering those tactics from a book. It's about understanding and applying those principles to whatever you run into.
Yeah, exactly. That's where maneuver warfare comes in. MCDP 10 really highlights that, using speed, agility, deception to outmaneuver the enemy.
So not just brute force, it's about being smarter, faster, more adaptable.
That's it. And it goes back to decentralized command. To really do maneuver warfare, you need Marines who can make decisions without waiting for orders.
Give Marines that freedom to take the initiative, exploit those opportunities, turn the tables, even when things are crazy.
Right. So how do you build a force that can do that? MCDP 10 says training and education are key.
Makes sense. Marines don't just become adaptable overnight. They need that training.
Yeah, Marines need to constantly be learning, improving their skills, challenging what they think they know, creating a culture where they improve, think critically.
So it's not just drills. It's about getting Marines to think on their own.
You got it. And the training has to be realistic, push Marines to their limits. MCDP 10 talks about force-on-force training, going up against a thinking opponent, just like real combat.
So it's not just about targets on a range. It's about that chaos of combat, getting Marines ready mentally and physically.
Exactly. And it needs to be integrated, involving all parts of the MAGTF, infantry, artillery, aviation, logistics, the whole team.
So everyone knows how they fit in and can work as a unit?
Right. But MCDP 10 goes beyond hands-on training. It also talks about professional military education. Marines at all levels need to be studying military history, theory, and doctrine.
So it's more than just being strong. It's about Marines being smart.
Right. Developing well-rounded Marines, comfortable in a tough situation and in thinking it through.
All of this. Training, education, adaptability. It's about developing a force that can do what MCDP 10 calls operational art.
Sounds pretty complex. What does that mean?
Connecting those tactical actions to the strategic objectives. Seeing the big picture, thinking ahead, finding solutions to those tough problems.
So it's about being more than just a tactician. It's about being a strategist.
Exactly. MCDP 10 argues that operational art is crucial for modern warfare, where things are constantly changing.
Adapting to the situation, thinking ahead of the enemy.
Marines need to be thinkers, problem solvers, leaders who can adapt.
That's the goal. And MCDP 10 gives you a way to develop those skills.
We've covered a lot in MCDP 10. We talked about war, different operations, maneuver warfare, command and control, the different levels of war, the challenges you face, and the roles of every Marine and their leaders.
And as we've seen, it all comes together in this doctrine that guides the Marine Corps to win battles and defend the nation.
Remember, this is just the beginning. Mastering MCDP 10 starts now. Study it. Talk about it with your fellow Marines, and most importantly, use it.
You'll find these ideas from MCDP 10 will help you a lot. Not just in the field, but in life in general. Adaptability, leadership, and critical thinking. Those are useful no matter what.
The Marine Corps is counting on you. Be ready for anything. MCDP 10 is your guide.
As you go through MCDP 10, think about how these ideas work. Not just for big operations, but for smaller missions and even everyday things.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into MCDP 10. Until next time, keep learning, keep training, and Semper Fidelis.